Good morning, everybody. Okay. Right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Fiona, and I'm from the Brain Plus team. It's great to have you join us this morning. I'm going to get straight to the point because I know you're all really busy. So every care home that we speak to and have been speaking to over the last 12 months right now is dealing with the same pressures. Rising needs, rising costs, tighter margins, and staff who are stretched to their limits. So the real question is not how much does something cost? The real question is, does this create value and is it worth it? Because if something saves staff time, reduces reactive incidents, improves resident stability, strengthens your CQC evidence, and increases family confidence, then the return far outweighs the spend. That's the heart of today's session, cutting through the noise and talking about ROI, what actually pays back in dementia care and what doesn't. And I am delighted to be joined by Dr. Simon Leigh, who will introduce himself in a moment. But before we get going, a few quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and will be shared afterwards. Please use the Q&A function for any questions, and we'll address as many as possible towards the end. And before I hand over to Simon, I just wanted to give a very quick reminder because we might have some relatively new faces on this month's webinar. So a quick reminder of what CST actually is because it's central to why we're all here. So next slide, please, Lindsay. Next slide. So, for those of you who have sort of heard of CST or have never heard of CST, cognitive stimulation therapy is the world's leading non-drug intervention for mild to moderate dementia. It has been NICE recommended since 2006. It has been subject to multiple Cochrane reviews, and it shows that if you deliver 2 sessions a week over 7 weeks, so a 14-session program in total, you can delay cognitive decline by up to 6 months. In addition, there are sustained improvements to mood, quality of life, communication, social interaction, and there are studies being published all the time about reducing apathy and aggression, and various different other interesting research questions that there's lots of evidence for. So we can talk to you about that separately. So it's been globally implemented. It is subject of many of the World Alzheimer's reports, and has been recommended in 35 countries globally. So we are not unique in focusing on cognitive stimulation therapy or getting excited about it. So as we start this webinar, imagine if in just 7 weeks you could improve cognition in your residents by 50%, boost quality of life in residents by 48% on self-reported outcome measures, so it is subjective, and improve social life, mood, adaptability, and hopefulness by between 23 to 50%, because that is what we're talking about. When we talk to our care homes that we work with, the experience of their residents, the experience of staff, the experience of families, they say that it's been nothing short of transformative. So we're very, very, very excited about Ayla. It is why we keep shouting about it. But we also know that these initiatives and intervention in today's climate, with such significant economic headwinds, they do need to make good business sense. So with that in mind, I am delighted to introduce Dr. Simon Leigh, who will be taking us through our ROI tool. So thank you again for joining us. Enough from me.
Thanks, Fee. Thank you very much. Yeah, we can jump on to the next slide. Right, let's go. So yeah, I'm here to talk to you about the return on investment of CST. And as Fiona said, CST has been around for a while, right? There's a lot of evidence behind CST. Yes, it's invariably practiced and implemented, but there is an awful lot to work with in terms of evidence, which made my life a lot easier when doing this. Who am I? Quick background. You're thinking, who's this guy talking to us? So I'm Simon. I'm a health economist. I'm an independent. So I work with medtech innovators, predominantly through health innovation networks. I'm a named health economist with a couple of health innovation networks, and I work with accelerators like SETA, for example. My role is to work with innovators, particularly in medtech, to define their value. Ultimately, it's to do their Ronseal argument and look at whether they actually do what they say on the tin. As you'll all know, a lot of technologies come with pretty high promises of what they can do, and then unfortunately, some of the time spectacularly fail to deliver. So My role is to look at a technology, look at the variety of benefits it could provide, and then assess the feasibility and the plausibility of each of those, ranking them to give a more realistic picture of value. And this is pretty much all I've ever done. I was an academic. I used to be at the University of Warwick and also Liverpool, but now independent. I think it's worth stating up front, just from my perspective, that an awful lot of technologies fail to demonstrate ROI, particularly early in their life. And for me as a health economist, this simply is not a problem. It's an inevitability. You only have so much money as an innovator to focus your efforts. You have a lot of things to do. And sometimes a lack of ability in demonstrating definitive ROI actually presents an opportunity to both innovators and customers because, as I'll talk to you about in a minute, as evidence goes up and as ROI, ability to demonstrate ROI goes up, naturally, price goes up. So often you can't have it both ways. You're looking for that sweet spot where people have evidence that it clinically works, but that evidence of ROI perhaps is still being developed because that's when the price is the most sensitive and most likely to be pushed down, but where the benefit is most guaranteed. Next slide, please. So yeah, just to summarize here, and we can jump straight to the next one as well if you want, Fee. We all know that budgets are massively tight. We know that every single decision is being scrutinized, and we know that nobody's getting fired for not buying that technology. And I think just coming to this slide here, when we look at this, have we gone forward one too far there, Fee? There we go. So back to this Goldilocks zone, super fast. We're looking for technologies that can prove that they work, that they actually have a clinical output, but we're still generating the ROI. And the reason for this, put simply, is because then pricing pressures are lower, but confidence is higher. And that is the sweet spot in health tech. And that's the zone that most technologies occupy, but fail to make the most of. So for me, as a health economist, I'm quite clear that if a technology can demonstrate its clinical impact and it has plausible benefits, we'll just scale down those benefits a little bit and we'll work out exactly how bad it needs to be in order to not be of benefit. And that's the way I like to approach this. So the question actually becomes, what do I realistically get back within 12 months? And what's a reasonable price which will protect me and my organization from exposure? So how bad does it need to be? Or how minimal does the evidence base have to be in order for it not to break even? And that's the theme I'm going to explore today, because actually CST has an awful lot of evidence behind it. So this should be relatively plain sailing. Next slide, please, Sophie. And just coming back to that evidence and the ability to provide everything. Innovators are busy, right? You guys will all know this. All the things that they have to do day to day. It's a ton of stuff. If you look at worth paying for, it's constantly more and more and more things to do. So any opportunities in the real world to collect real world data, to refine value propositions, to get actual real world efficacy data, and to shorten those confidence intervals and provide more confidence around pricing and around benefit, there are opportunities for collaboration between innovators and between industry, whether that and ultimately, whether that's at an ICB level, whether that's at a care home level. There are so many opportunities here. And I think it's our duty to work together on this to solve the picture of ROI, because it's exceptionally rare that ROI is cemented in stone. ROI differs for every single organization because, as we know, you can implement a technology, you may not use it. You can use it, you may not get all the benefit out of it. You can get some of the benefit out of it, you might not continue using it. Your pathways could be different locally. You could have a different case mix, a different staff mix. So it's really important that we take any estimates of ROI up front with a pinch of salt, and we make sure that we bespoke these to the nuance of our local organizations and the ways that we work. And I think that's the really important thing here, that any estimates of return on investment are very carefully amended to reflect the reality of what happens on the ground in your organization, because otherwise you can very quickly get whitewashed and blown away with numbers that aren't actually that relevant. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that shortly. Next slide, please. So on this theme, just super quick before we move on, the logic behind the model that I had the absolute pleasure of creating this for Brain Plus. It was really good fun, in all fairness, because it's rare that you get an ROI that touches on so many domains. Usually ROIs are quite specific to one very unique very tangible thing. It does this, and it does this well, and it only does this. Whereas actually, from doing a literature review on CST, and it was a decent lit review, it appeared that the benefits were quite multifaceted. So it gave me a lot of ability to explore different areas of value that I perhaps wouldn't usually get. And the logic that I've applied in this model going forward is parachute logic. So I've said basically that there are several very plausible mechanisms of action for benefit here. And the way I've applied this is by saying, look, I don't need to know to the exact pounds and pence, the exact 3 decimal points, exactly how something works, much like I don't need to know exactly how cost effective a luggage scale is going to be. I know that airports charge fees, therefore I know a luggage scale will be of use to me because I can use it up front. And it's that sort of logic, it's common sense logic is what I've applied here. So it's making sure that things aren't too granular, but that they're really, really easy to follow and understand. Next slide, please. Just touching on this one last time before we actually see this. So yes, plausible benefit obviously becomes the most plausible when it reaches multiple domains. And you'll see this in the model that's been created here. Hedging your bets. There's lots and lots of different ways that CST can impact both families, residents, care homes themselves and their staff. And we're going to go through all of these today with the assumptions under each, and we're going to basically pull them apart. I'm going to give you the opportunity to pull apart my assumptions and to say, well, what if this? What if you got that wrong? What if it was that instead? And then we'll revisit the results and see if it works for you ultimately. Next slide, please. So, super quick, the art of the possible, how we actually did the model, right? I need to tell you what went into it so that you can interpret it in the correct way. I created a realistic, customizable benefit realization model here for Ayla. The aim was to quantify the most likely range of savings, split as cashable and efficiency, as a result of embedding digital CST. The key thing here is that it was built to be auditable, so that it's transparent assumptions with every single assumption open to change, not one black box. So absolutely every number in there can be amended to better reflect the reality of your local organization. And I implore you after this call, perhaps to send in an email, send in a request to make the changes, to see how this works for your organization, because it's been built with that in mind so that you can actually see how this will work for you on the ground based on your data and your reality of service provision. And the reason I've done this is because guidance is just guidance. Nobody follows the guidance for anything perfectly to the letter because there's local variations. It's never say always and never say never. And everywhere has slightly different nuances, and that's why it's been built this way. So we want to make sure that this can be amended to reflect the reality of your situation. Next slide, please. And where did we get the numbers finally? So I did a series of semi-structured conversations with care home staff, understanding their current processes, very much a time and motion-esque approach where I said, how are you currently doing this? What are the pain points? How does this actually play out in the real world? Then I performed a literature review looking at evidence around CST and around the current provision of dementia care in residential and care home settings. And then we also pulled in data from real world implementations of Ayla to power some of these assumptions so that we had a nice, broad, holistic approach for all of the value points here and all of the standard of care estimates. I used a cost consequence approach, which is the one that NICE recommends for medtech. So basically, a slew of benefits that we can include in there. Any benefit is worth capturing. So it's not just specifically one, it's a holistic net of benefits. And I focused on what changes operationally. So I really wasn't that bothered about beyond 1 year benefits, quality of life benefits, qualies, all of that stuff that NHS England would love, but ultimately that they're not paying for. So I'm trying to focus on things that you guys would ultimately end up paying for or that would impact your pocket. So very operationally, very local, very specific. I'm not too bothered about wishy-washy stuff that comes down the line. So no long-range promises. And next slide, please. So where did I focus with this model, and where does this model start to illustrate the potential benefits that digital CST can provide? So we focused specifically on retaining residents. So there's an assumption in there from the literature and from speaking to the staff that some residents at some point will progress. Most residents will progress at some point. They may need to go to higher acuity care that may be out of your setting or out of your organization network into another network where that patient then disappears. The fee attached to that patient also disappears. So how can we prevent this or at least slow this down by slowing down the progression of dementia? As we said in the literature, CST tends to slow progression down 3 to 6 months. We've seen this in the NICE recommendations. So what does that 3 to 6 months actually look like in the real world? And vacancies, bed occupancy. This was a big one that we talked about with the groups that we talked with. How can we reduce the amount of time where beds are left vacant? And how could an increase in CQC rating impact that? How does CQC rating impact people's choices when it comes to choosing a care home for their loved ones? And could we make a feasible link between the two? Admin time associated with current processes around CST. So if you are actually delivering this out in the real world via paper-based forms and books, firstly, well, fair play to you. Secondly, what is the actual impact of this in terms of time, admin, filling in these forms? So we looked at that element as well. Time out of the unit. So as people progress and their dementia ultimately gets worse, we see that with more challenging behaviours and with a decrease in well-being, we then tend to see an increase in time out of unit, time in hospital with appointments. So what's the staff impact of that? How much time does it take staff out of the unit? Transport costs associated for this. Sedative use. As we start to get worse, we perhaps might need intervention for personal care and or other things. What's the time associated with actually doing this? The practical time of drawing these medicines, of getting people together to deliver these for patients on a day-to-day basis. So we did a lit review looking at how many patients, what percentage of patients receive these, and what's the time involved in administering these. And finally, staff absence. So challenging behaviors, obviously patients getting worse, this can have an impact on staff, right? If you're constantly dealing with very difficult situations, you're more likely to be off sick. So what if we can if we could decrease staff absence by a very small amount? What impact would that actually have? And these are the 6 streams that we're going to follow throughout this. And I've gone through each one by one to cover them off. And I've given a base case estimate, which is from the literature, and I've given an ultra conservative estimate, which is if we're being highly, highly critical and we basically think, what's the very minimal impact that could possibly be had here? What does that impact look like as well? So if we just jump to the next slide, please. And again. So this is the model. This is the one that I created. Again, love doing it. And I'd implore all of you, as Fiona has said, if you do want to book in time to go through this for your organization to change the parameters for your specifics, please do feel free. We would love to work with you on this to further refine this, to improve it, to narrow things, add in bits that we may have missed, because I'm certainly not a dementia carer. I'm not a clinician. Yes, I've got family links, but I don't do this day in, day out. So anything that we can do to build and improve the quality of this, we would very much love to, because I'd love to further refine this and make it better. As you can see here, the way that this has been done is that absolutely everything is amendable. Every single assumption. And there are a fair old number of assumptions in here. I think in the end, it's close to 21. And every single one can be amended. So what we did is we went through kind of value line by value line and looked at how these play out. And that's what I'm just going to do with you now really quickly. And we've gone through assuming that the annual purchase cost of Ayla is £1,500 for this per care home. So £1,500 is our reference baseline and everything else falls in related to that. And you can see the big figures here that are thrown around. And I'm going to explain to you why these figures are the way that they are on the next slides. So we can jump forward. So the first value stream, keeping residents for longer. So we made an assumption here, whether rightly or wrongly, that at the moment, about 15% of residents in a given year will escalate. This was from a paper by Lang Buisson in 2023 in a UK setting that showed about 15% of care home residents will be escalated to higher acuity settings and leave their current setting. That will leave their bed vacant for a short period of time unless there's exceptionally high demand for that unit. We took an average of 46 beds in the average care home. That came from English data. So we literally just we managed to get data from NHS England and went, right, okay, what's the average size of the average care home? And it was 46 beds was the one that we took. We assumed that the delay in escalation from CST is 3 months, bearing in mind that the evidence suggests that it's 3 to 6 months from the NICE recommended evidence. So we took the lower bound of that. And we assumed that the revenue for a given bed in a given week was £949, which was the reference rate that I got. Again, oh, from the Department of Health and from NHS England. So £949 a week. And we literally multiplied these through. So we said, okay, if there's a 15% escalation rate currently, and we can reduce this escalation by 3 months for the average patient, we're looking at a rather significant saving there. Or it's not a saving, it's actually revenue generation of 85,000 where we're building further revenue. Now, it's worth stating here that when we look at the ultra conservative angle here, like where I really went for this and tried to tie this back as much as possible, if we assume that only 1% of patients escalate in a given year, so 99% of patients stay exactly where they are year on year and don't leave the unit, don't leave the care home, we still assume 46 beds, and we assume that we can only delay escalation by a singular month. So 1/6 of the efficacy that's been stated in the recommendations from NICE, and the revenue stays the same. The benefit comes out at £1,894 in a year, which still exceeds the purchase price for Ayla. So for us up front here, to know that we only need to hit a 1 month delay for a 1% escalation rate kind of puts us on a good stead from going forward. So that's our starting point here. And now if we jump to value stream 2, please. So value stream 2 is reducing vacant bed days. So again, the paper from Lang-Brusson in 2023 said that the average occupancy rate is 87% for the average care home. Now, this varied depending on the location of the care home in the UK and also on their ratings, their CQC ratings. Anyone with a high or outstanding CQC rating had a 92% occupancy rate, whereas anyone with less than that was roughly at 87%, dropping to the very lowest, I think it was something like 73%. So we assumed that if we could increase occupancy by 5%, which would get us up to outstanding for the average care home through the provision of CST and making sure that we're delivering that NICE recommended therapeutic to residents, that we could realise £113,000 revenue generation. And again, this is from the same thing of £949 per week and filling in occupancy for an average 46 bed care home. Now, if you're a larger care home, it's going to be much larger. If you're smaller, it's going to be far smaller. In our ultra conservative estimate, what we did is we assume that your current occupancy rate is 99%. So you've only got 1% vacancy throughout the year. And we're only able to increase this naturally by 1% because there's only 1% left. So if you're a care home with 99% occupancy, and going from, let's say, good to outstanding, or being able to increase your occupancy by 1% because you're offering a unique service, a differentiator, something different that every other care home doesn't offer. Obviously, that saving is still about 12 times greater than the purchase price of Ayla. So there's some wiggle room in there with this one alone as well. So next slide, please. In terms of reducing admin time, we assumed that roughly for those who are actively conducting CST at the moment and doing this via paper, that there's a time of about 2 hours per week in terms of admin. And this was based on the conversation that we had with a research director at a care home on the right there that said there's a financial cost to meeting compliance through delivery of paper-based CST and a benefit in having the evidence already in place rather than having to put it out last minute, saying, here you go, here's all the documentation you need. You don't have to spend admin time messing around with it. That was the quote that we got there. So we've assumed that if we could reduce admin time by just 2 hours per week at a salary of £20 per hour, so this is for a slightly more senior member of staff who will be working on this, it's about a £2,000 saving per year. But if we reduce that to just 1 hour a week and said it was someone on minimum wage who was doing this, it's still about £676 overall throughout the year. So it's about 45% of the license cost that's covered just from this one specific element in absence of the others. Next slide, please. I'm going to pick up the pace on these slightly. Reducing hospital attendance. So we assumed that we could reduce 2 hospital admissions in a given year, only 2 across 46 residents in a given year, and that the staff time per event would be roughly 4 hours in total. So 4 hours to leave the unit, go to the hospital and get back. We assume that the salary per hour of the person working with these people was £15. We've gone slightly higher than minimum wage there, and there'd be a transport associated cost for moving patients and transiting them of £100. That came to about a £300 saving. If we reduce that and said we only reduce one admission, we drop that to 160. And again, we had a little quote there that said if you're keeping somebody more cognitively and less distressed in their dementia, that saves a lot of money. Not having to take them out of the home to take them and convey them to the hospital for follow-on and mental health appointments. Again, it was the same care home research director. So that's just the link between that to show there's another possibility there. And it's not a big saving, £160 in the ultra conservative case, but it's still about 11% of the purchase price of this. So it's a good chunk when you look at it that way. Next slide, please. Reducing sedative use. So we had an assumption here from the literature that about 10% of patients in a care home will receive antipsychotics and 20% will receive sedatives. Now, this may differ naturally by setting, by case mix, but these were just the literary estimates that we found, and we're very happy to provide the references after the call for anyone who needs these to corroborate this. We assumed that it would take 5 minutes per day per patient to draw these up, to have it all checked off and signed off, and to actually administer it. And that the staff salary for the person doing this would be roughly £20 per hour. And we said, what if we could reduce this by just 10%? What would that look like? And it was a saving of about £840. Now, if we reduce this by just 2% and we reduce the staff salary to absolute minimum wage, then we see that that drops to about 109. So it's still, again, not a massive saving for this one specific thing, but it's still about 7% of the purchase price. And it's only small if you don't get any of the other benefits that we're talking about here. So next slide, please. This is the last one, I promise. I'm going to stop doing these death by 1,000 cuts. And the final one was increasing discharge to assess desirability. So I've done this personally, where I've had to find a care home with my own father and spent ages looking through what seemed like an unending catalogue of care homes, starting first rating them by CQC rating and then going by price and so on and so forward. So I've done this myself. So we had an assumption here where we said, well, okay, what if we could improve desirability for discharge to assess and eligibility? What if we could, in some way, increase the number of D2A beds that you get in a given year? And we made an assumption that across a whole calendar year, across a 46-bed unit, we could achieve just one additional D2A bed in a given year. So that's assuming that you have at least one bed vacant at that point. And that the average discharge to assess stay is about 37 days. So we took that from NHS England. And your average discharge to assess fee per week is about £950. And we said, well, what if we can increase your desirability or the chances of you being selected by 10%? What would that look like? And it was about £500 revenue generation throughout the year. So again, not huge, but significant enough because it's still quite an amount. And when you take the most conservative estimate here, so increasing this by just 2%, the likelihood, it was still a saving of about £100, which was about 7% of Ayla's purchase price. So we can jump forward to the next slide now, and I'm going to start concluding on this. There we go. So a very quick question here. How wrong do we have to be in order to not realize a positive return? Like, I was very curious about this. Like, so I threw a lot of big numbers out here in different points, and it was completely cards on the table, saying that all of these are completely amendable to the specifics of your setting. But I thought, how can we boil this down to a lowest common denominator and go, how bad does it need to be in order for you not to break even on an initial £1,500 investment per care home? So I reversed the maths on this and sought to answer this question. So if we go to the next slide. So in order for you not to return the initial £1,500 investment, the following would have to occur. You would have to have zero escalation of residents in a given year, or have less than 1% escalation. And with this, Ayla only reduces this by less than 0.4%. And on top of this, you'd have to have a 100% occupancy rate all year round, or 99% occupancy, and Ayla only reduces occupancy by less than 0.05%. In addition to this, you would also need to spend less than 1 hour per week doing admin, and Ayla was only able to reduce this by less than 50%, and Ayla only increases your discharge to assess desirability by less than 1%. So if all these things play out, you have zero escalation, or you have 1% escalation and Ayla barely touches it, and you have 100% occupancy or 99% and Ayla barely touches it, or you spend less than 1 hour a week, and on top of this, basically we don't increase your desirability at all, then yeah, you're probably not going to make your money back. But based on the numbers, all things considered, if you fall into that group, firstly, fair play to you. Secondly, yeah, don't bother because you're not going to save anything. But if any of those aren't true, then there's a present and distinct chance that you will be able to save something here based on the numbers. And my hope is that you would follow up and have a call with the guys at Brain Plus to see what this would actually look like for you. Because all the numbers I presented to you today have been very ballpark, have been based on literature, have been based on very wide intervals where I've had to design this in a way that it works for anyone and everyone. But as a result, it's not going to fit the nuance and the specifics of your organization. So my hope is that, and we can jump to the next slide if you want, please, Fee. My hope is that you now follow on forwards and speak to the guys at Brain Plus to see if they can generate this more specifically for you for the specifics of your setting. So just to summarize here from me, this is a pragmatic ROI. It's a 1 year, horizon. I'm not doing Nobel Prize winning, nice standard long-term modeling over 10, 20 years. Really is no point for this cohort. There just is no point. It's designed to estimate the upfront cashable and operational benefits of using Ayla in a very specific care home setting. And we've done this by enabling the assumptions to go as far and wide as possible. It uses a cost consequence and budget impact style approach, and it is intentionally short-term horizon and scenario based because, as we've said, all organizations are very different with different case mix, different staff mix, and different approaches. I also need to be clear that there are no definitive promises in here. This is basically, this is exactly what you will say, because that's utter nonsense. That's never the case. Instead, there is this transparent and auditable best estimate framework here, and I implore you to speak to the guys at Brain Plus and to refine this for yourself. It's very much that old adage of your experience may differ. Put your actual numbers in here and you'll get a more realistic estimate. If you go with the averages, then you can expect it to be average in terms of accuracy. So it's really important that if you want to get a better appreciation, take the time to invest in this. And also, this estimation does miss a number of benefits. It is worth pointing out. I only had a certain amount of time to do this. I could have spent forever on it, but there are some things that sadly I just could not monetize in this time. So we're focusing on near-term operational impacts, but we don't monetize, for example, the benefits of helping you stand out in a competitive market, of improving family satisfaction and online reputation, reducing safeguarding issues tied to distressed or disengaged residents. These things were either A, very difficult to put numbers on, or B, I simply just ran out of time and couldn't do this. So this is by no means all encompassing. This is just a snapshot of the things that it could do. Next slide, please. So yeah, like I said, challenge these guys. Ask to amend the model to reflect your organizational needs and setup and see if it makes sense for you. Do it via an email or set up a quick meeting. If needed, I potentially may even be able to join you to help in figuring things out. And just one final slide, and then I think we are done. So yeah, like I said, just said before, get in touch with these guys. The QR code's there. I'm going to hand you back to Fiona now. But yeah, any questions for me, very happy to answer. And again, anyone has any questions beyond this, feel free to email me equally.
Thanks so much, Simon. That was really, really interesting. Just for the audience, we've got just over 10 minutes for any questions. I can see that a couple of questions have come through, but just as a quick prompt and a reminder, please do ask your questions. And if we can't get to them in the webinar, then we will get to them over email. But I guess I've got two questions myself, Simon. The first question is, I think it would be really helpful to understand a little bit more about the feedback you had from care homes that you spoke to, in particular the fact that most care homes have a cohort of people with dementia, but it's not their entire care home. And I just wondered how that factored into the conversations you had with care home leaders as to the extent to which they have to prioritize this group from an economic case.
Yeah, no, it was a really good point. So yeah, obviously a lot of the homes that we spoke to, they had groups with very differing needs, and it was about obviously trying to treat each group as best as they possibly could. I think the reality of what I noticed in these conversations, and again, may not be reflective of every single organization, was that those with dementia who are progressing perhaps quicker than expected or quicker than liked tended to take up a disproportionate amount of time, a disproportionate amount of staff energy and of staff attention, such that those who perhaps were less severe, lower acuity, or weren't experiencing these problems, therefore didn't quite get as much in return and weren't able to focus as much energy there. So it was very much the conversation around disproportionate energy expenditure and time expenditure. And if there's any way of reducing this by any amount, this would have a commensurate impact on everybody throughout the whole care home.
Right, thanks. So the other question, obviously you and I have known each other a long time now, and one of the things that I think sort of always gets missed with the implementation of technology is the cost of implementation, and how that gets factored into some of these assertions. And I was just wondering if you could, because you work with tech, whether you had any sort of observations or general trends that you could share with this with the audience around cost of implementation and whether that's a real barrier or whether actually on analysis it's worth it.
So I think it's a really good question. I think it depends on what your intention is, which I realize is a weird thing to say. I think if you're going into this and you see a potential to change the way that you deliver your care going forward, you look to change your pathway. This can, the implementation cost up front, there's going to be some time. We're going to have to change processes. We're going to have to train staff. We're going to have to make sure that everyone's aware of this. There is naturally some time associated to this, and there's an adoption curve that takes time to fit in with this. But over the longer term, looking at most technologies that I've worked with, that adoption curve, yes, it's slow in the first year and it takes a while, but once you've got a few champions in place, you get a significant acceleration over time. That is expedited massively by decent customer success and decent, account handling and support. I think if you can get that on the ground, it's massively helpful. I think where technology struggle the most in their implementation costs is where the things that you're implementing are not typically either A, required, or B, recommended in guidance, or C, not done at all. Now, if you're replacing a service that's already being done or should be being done, that should be easier because you're doing that anyway and trying to make that process faster. So it comes down to the benefits to the individualized people. And in general, if you're saving people time, making their lives easier and asking them to do less, all in all, you're going to have an easier path to adoption. If you're asking people to do more than they were doing, different to what they were doing, and to completely squeeze more in the time that they've already got, it's going to be a hard slog. Those implementation costs are going to be far harder. You're going to have to persuade people more. It's going to take more time, and ultimately your outcomes aren't going to be as positive in the near term, at least.
And I guess, that's where, the ROI, as you said, that very focus on one specific lever become very vulnerable, I guess. Whereas when you've got a breadth of levers, chances are you're appealing to a broader range. And I think what you've just said is certainly consistent with the evidence around the barriers to implementing CST, not, forgetting Ayla for a second, that leadership is really important in terms of change management, and cultural change. We've got a question. Is there any information reported that can be provided about the other measures that were reported recorded? I think that's relating to the evidence base.
So report the measures that were reported, recorded. So is that recorded within the interviews or recorded within? I'm slightly uncertain about this.
Yeah, if the Tabitha, if you could just elaborate slightly and we'll come back to it. Rachel's asked a question in terms of I'm interested in how we capture. Oh, okay. Tabitha's come back, e.g., family satisfaction, reports from workers, and carer engagement.
Is there any information reported that can be provided about the other measures that were reported? Yes, the family satisfaction reports from workers and care engagement. Yes, so I mean, Fee, I think you'll know this best, but I think from the implementations that have been completed already for Ayla, and the real world work that you've done, the subjective feedback that you've got, I believe you do have a lot of that covered off, don't you, in a
Yeah,
handy ready to send dossier.
We do, we do. We have a service evaluation protocol that shows you exactly how we do it in terms of looking at feedback from the residents. It's a subjective assessment, likewise with their families, and then also ongoing staff feedback throughout the initial CST program and thereafter. We can share that with you, Tabitha, so you can see the different outcome measurements, which leans on some of the cognitive measure scales, but also the positive psychology outcome measures to assess some of the changes to mood. And we can also share with you the implementation reports, which was from one of our customers down in the southeast. A pleasure. Rachel has asked, I'm interested in how we capture the evidence. Does Ayla integrate with platforms such as PCS? So, Rachel, at this particular moment in time, not yet. However, what I can tell you is that Ayla has been built in a modular way, and therefore we're always open to API integrations because we recognize that adding in additional work layers is not particularly helpful when you spent a lot of time, resource, investment, and energy in digitizing your care management processes. So that's a case of having that conversation with us and we can actively explore it. I think that is it for questions. I'm also conscious that we're coming up to time. This has been focused. So Tabitha, this has been focused obviously on CST delivered in a group setting. Is there any research or insight you may have about individualized CST? So Tabitha, again, a great question. There is a lot of research and evidence about individualized CST. Ayla has been designed primarily to deliver the NICE recommendation, which is the group delivery model, to get some of those benefits around cognition, which relates to the ability for residents or patients or participants to interact with each other. UCL has an individualized CST manual, and we're actively exploring how we can potentially evolve and adapt Ayla to recognize that it slightly deviates away from our medical device status. So we need to just be mindful of that, but equally recognizing that from a pragmatic point of view, the activities that are available via Ayla could be used in a one-to-one individualized setting, and that will precede the eventual integration of the individualized CST manual into Ayla. I hope that's okay and that's understood. But again, any questions, please do feel free. Hello@aylacare.com or Fiona@aylacare.com, and we can forward to the relevant teams. And as Simon said, or slash promised, you may even see him on another call when we look at our individualized business cases for you if you're interested. So with a couple of minutes to go, thank you very, very, very much, Simon, for joining us today. I know that you said you enjoyed it, but we really enjoyed it too, working with you and understanding the different levers and how broad brush CST can impact the overall delivery of care home operations. So thank you very, very much. To all of you who have joined us, again, thank you. If this is your first webinar, we hope to see you again soon. If you are a repeat attendee to our webinars, thank you. We're really grateful for the support. Moving forward, in a few weeks' time, we will be hosting another webinar, Kickstarting 2026, with activities and wellbeing. Devika, our CEO, had the pleasure of meeting the most incredible activities coordinator, and we're really excited to be welcoming him in January to talk about his initiatives and the differences he observes in the care home that he works within. So obviously, because it's December, there's only one thing left for me to do, which is to wish you all a very happy Christmas, a very happy new year, and we will see you in 2026. Thank you again.